I'm Bob von Bargen, President Emeritus of the Armed Forces Heritage Museum, and your host for this series. In this episode, you will join Colonel Holm as he struggles with the wartime priorities of Afghanistan culture and his reluctance to buy in. It's an education. Here's Colonel Holm as he continues to relate his experiences as an air advisor to the Afghanistan Air Force.
I'm a combat search and rescue helicopter pilot. This next picture shows part of what I do. As combat search and rescue and in the Army, I flew medevac helicopters. This picture shows two things. It shows a picture on the left of a soldier that has been wounded and is being treated, and shows a picture on the right of a coffin of an Afghan soldier in the back of my helicopter that's been killed. They called them martyrs. And what I had to really come to grips with very, very early on in Afghanistan, probably within 2 weeks, I became aware of an attack on a base just outside of Kabul. And I went to General Sadallah in charge of the helicopter. Says, General Sadallah, we have an attack. There are many wounded. I'm getting medics standing by with your medics and my medics, and I need a helicopter to go help these people. And he goes, Olaf, sit down, have a seat, have some chai, have some tea. I go, General Sadallah, we've got to go there. In my world, the golden hour, you got to get there right now and get the people back to more definitive care, and you can save their life. And he goes, Olaf, sit down, have some chai, relax. We will go, but we will go later. And I was going, why can't we go now? He didn't really clearly state it, but what I found out was that in Afghanistan, the number one priority mission was not going out and saving lives. It was returning dead bodies back to their families. And this was a very difficult thing for me to accept. That is not right. You cannot do that. Human life becomes more important than returning the dead. You are wrong. Am I right, or is he right? Where are we after all? We're in Afghanistan. This is their culture. This is their military. And it was very frustrating for me. So I had to sit down, I had my chai, and I thought it through. And then what happened, I found out, is that when somebody died, we had a higher priority to go use the helicopter and go get people. And that's what he was waiting for. And so over my year in Afghanistan, I ended up flying. My number one mission was returning martyrs back to their families. And I learned that unlike the U.S. military, where a son or a daughter is going to join the military and the parents will know that if my son or daughter is wounded, I know the American government's going to do whatever they can to get him back safely. And we will. We'll stop a war if we know where somebody's hurt. We spend tremendous amount of resources to ensure that our wounded survive a conflict. That's what we stand for. In Afghanistan, when they recruited the soldiers and they go to the parents and they say, if your son is killed and becomes a martyr, we promise that you will have his body within 72 hours. That's their promise, and that was a big part of their recruiting. And it seems almost incomprehensible to a Western mind, but to that mindset, that was very, very important. And true to their word, the Afghan government, the Afghan military did just that. And I flew, and it was a great honor, and I grew to understand this a little bit more. When soldiers died, we would take them to their families. And I did it all over Afghanistan. I've got a picture of that. Now it shows a couple of those situations. So what we think is right and what we know is wrong may not be so. And you have to learn that at a very early time period when you go to places like Afghanistan. And you have to look back and think, who's right? And it was a big moment. Certainly, I'm still a rescue guy. I think we had to go rescue him first. But I also kind of appreciate and respect what they're doing as well. Okay, like I was talking about, I'm a helicopter guy. I was going to Afghanistan. I'm going to go teach the Afghan military how to fly. What I found was that most of the pilots were older than me. Had been flying for 20, 30 years. A lot of people think, well, well, who taught them? Well, the Soviets did. They've been learning since the 80s. I went to flight school in 1990. And these people have been surviving in combat. A lot of them have been shot down. A lot of them have been prisoner. A lot of them, stories just very similar to General Sadallah, and yet they continued a very difficult life. And so how am I going to teach them how to fly? Well, what we ended up doing was I just go out flying combat missions with my Afghan friends right from the start. Within a week of my arrival, I had 25 hours in the Mi-17, and boom, I was out flying combat missions. And what I did was I earned my stripes with the Afghan military. We go out, fly combat, and I learned from my Afghan friends. And over time, I garnered respect, I garnered rapport, and then I could say, well, you do it this way. Well, what do you think about doing it this way? But I got to be honest with you. The Afghans probably taught me more about surviving in Afghanistan, I guarantee you, than I could ever have taught. And what we had to do is adjust. I'm not trying to make a U.S. military. I'm trying to look at what resources they have and see if we can make them a little bit better. But it takes time. It took 3 months before I could really go to an Afghan and say, how about doing it this way? And it was a really rewarding part of being an advisor. I don't always have the answers. I'd like to ask you, what do you do in these situations? And that made it all the more rewarding. And then it made me more effective as an advisor, because if you walk into a country and say, let's say an Afghan walked in here and said, oh, I'm from Afghanistan, you guys have everything wrong, let me show you how to do it because we're Afghans. How well would that be received in this room? It wouldn't. So why would I expect to have that same positive result if I would walk in and say, I'm an American, we know how to do everything right, just shut up and listen, we're going to make you better? You'd be extremely ineffective, and you might even get shot. So this picture right here shows me actually doing what I thought I was going to be doing, and that is teaching a young guy how to fly. What I didn't know was I was going to teaching him how to fly right in the middle of combat. This particular picture I took when we were going into the Holm Valley, and this young man, I gave him the flight controls as we were taking off. I'd never seen him before, from Camp Leatherneck in it was Camp Bastion, right in the central, just north of Holm Valley. So we took off, and we were going to go do the supply mission to this fire base, and I had a lot of radios I needed to talk on, and I had to do a lot of navigating because it's a combat zone, and I didn't have secure radios. That means I had to use code using script of paper to cipher codes, and it took a lot of work. So I needed my co-pilot to fly. Well, obviously, everybody up to this point been a pilot. So we take off, and we're heading towards Helmand, and I give the co-pilot the flight controls, and I'm starting to do all my communicating, navigating, and all of a sudden the aircraft starts going into a slight roll and a dive. And I go, what? I grab the controls, and I take it from him. I said, what are you doing? Why are you doing this turn? And he goes, you did not tell me where to go. Okay. Hold altitude 150, heading... whatever, airspeed, whatever. And he says, okay. And now, again, I'm doing this through an interpreter, by the way. I give him the controls. I go back to my CAC, reading, navigating, communicating. All of a sudden, a few minutes later, the aircraft goes into a gradual roll and another dive. And I grab the controls from this young man, and I go, what are you doing? What's the problem? Have you been to flight school? And he goes, yes, thank you. I go, wait a minute. Have you been to flight school? I found out he just graduated university, and this was flight school. And I was his primary teacher. And we were going into the biggest battle in Afghanistan. Afghans are smart. What are they going to do? Send their most senior guys, been through the most? No, send the junior guy with the American. Let them get shot up. And so I ended up teaching this young man how to hover after we got back from flights, doing combat missions and doing, basic flying skills. And he was a great young man. He just soaked it up. I mean, I beat him on the head with sticks and everything else, had fun with him, and we did all sorts of hard work, and he never backed down. So I was so proud of this young man, and that's what I thought I would be doing in Afghanistan. I just didn't realize it would be in the middle of combat. But fun picture. Fun.
Now, can you imagine trying to teach someone to basically fly the helicopter, manually encode messages by hand, and cope with combat conditions all at the same time? Amazing, and a tribute to Colonel Holm's skill as a pilot and as an outstanding representative of the U.S. military. In our next episode, you will gain greater insight into flight operations, the Afghan culture, and Colonel Holm's Russian-built helicopter. See you next time.